Today, I want to talk about why I record myself and why I create these videos about quite personal topics like my mental health, my previous experience of mental illness, and the ongoing management of my vulnerability to depression and psychosis. So, one really important reason for me to share my experience and to do that very openly, attached to my face and my name, is that in the aftermath of my first psychotic depressive episode, and also to a lesser degree after subsequent episodes, I felt very isolated and I felt very alone. I really felt very shocked that this had happened to me. I never imagined perhaps that I would develop depression, but certainly not that I would develop a psychotic illness or a psychotic type of depression. That seemed like very far away from my imagination, seemed very alien to me. And that same sentiment was directly or indirectly communicated to me as well by several health professionals. So, for example, in the aftermath of the first psychotic depressive episode that I experienced, I was referred to a community mental health team to follow up with me. And they basically said they had never seen someone recover as quickly as me. So I think one end of the spectrum that we often see is people who are in the most unlucky of positions. So perhaps when we think about psychotic illness, we think about dangerous people, aggressive people. While actually, when we look at the statistics, we know that people with depression or people with psychosis are not significantly more aggressive or dangerous than any other type of people or people with any other kind of condition. But it's the opposite exactly, that they are more likely to become the victims of crime. And that feeling was really strong, that feeling of isolation, that feeling of dread or not understanding or not knowing how I had ended up in this place where I now had to deal with both the very real consequences of having a mental illness and recovering from that and managing my vulnerability to depression, but also the stigma that comes with it, the self-stigma, but also the stigma from other people. And it was only really when I stumbled on an academic article written by an English psychiatrist who detailed his own experience with psychosis, stress induced psychosis, and who then detailed his recovery afterwards, that I started feeling, I don't know, I guess a bit more normal in a way, that depression and psychosis is something that happens to people of all ages, people of all genders, people of all socioeconomic status, people of all educational status, etc. Right? And that really gave me hope, and that really helped in my recovery. This feeling that there was hope, that recovery was possible, because often once you experience psychotic symptoms, there is, understandably partly, but also partly, I think, prejudicial, a lot of doom and gloom. There is a lot of anxiety that your life as you know it is over. And I basically want to tell you that no, that is not the case. It is a serious mental illness if you develop psychotic depression, any other type of depression, or any other type of psychosis. But I really want to tell you and really want to share with you that I have gone through severe mental illness, and it might happen to me again. I don't know. I have a vulnerability and I try to manage it as well as I can. But I've also learned over the past decade that these things can't completely be controlled and predicted, etc. You have to roll with the punches a little bit. And so while I find it quite anxiety inducing and quite scary in a way to share about my own experience openly on such a public forum, I think there's still a very limited number of voices out there that shares their experience with psychotic depression or any other type of psychotic illness, right? So Stigma has gone down and openness has gone up when it comes to perhaps straightforward depression and anxiety. And that is great. That's an awesome improvement. And there's still a long way to go, even with those kind of mental illnesses. But when we look at the psychotic spectrum of conditions, there's still a lot of a cloud of mystery and hush, don't talk about it, because people will maybe think you're crazy. They might not hire you, they might not rent you a house or an apartment, they might not want to be friends with you, they might not want their kids to play with your kids at your home. There's lots of stigma still associated with mental illness. And there is, of course, the risk that I expose myself to that stigma a bit more by being so public and so vocal about my experience. But I really think if I can only contribute to one or maybe two or three people out there, right, you that I'm talking to at the moment, who might be going through a similar experience, or maybe someone your loved one is going through a similar experience, and you might find some value in the information and in the experiences that I share. I think that's really worth it then for me. So my hope is really that I can contribute in a small way to helping lift the stigma a bit on psychotic depression, and helping maybe one, two, or a few people out there like you potentially feel more hopeful that if this is the experience that you are going through in life as well, similar, mental illness does not have to be the end of your life as you know it, right? Recovery is possible, and if complete recovery is not possible, or even if it is possible, management is another option, right? So for me, for example, at the moment I am recovered from depression, I'm recovered from psychosis, and have been for quite a while. But I will always carry that vulnerability for depression with me, right? In wherever you think it sits in my genetic makeup or in my coping strategies, or most likely a combination of all those things, right? And so management is a very important part, as well, as I talked about in one of my recent videos. And so one thing that I want to perhaps impart on you is that we need to move beyond, right, so black white thinking, in the sense that you're either ill or you're 100% healthy. And that's often not the case for people with a lot of different conditions, but for mental health especially, right? I don't have depression at the moment, I don't have psychosis at the moment, but I very actively need to manage my vulnerability for both of them. And I've become very skilled together with my professional support team in that over the last decade or so. And you can as well, right? You can start or continue to learn to recognize early warning signals that your mental health might be starting to slip, and preventatively or very early on change course, change direction, right? Change a couple of basic things, for example, sleep, eating, socializing. They're just examples, right? These are the things that work for me. What works for you might be different. But I guess the message that I want to send really is that don't give in to the stigma that exists around psychotic illnesses, right? You can often recover. And if recovery is not possible, you can often manage this. An experience of psychotic depression or a similar experience does not mean the end of your life as you know it. You can go on that slow recovery road.